What's up, guys? Today we're gonna look at button versus big blind Cbetting on two Broadway boards, and the way we're gonna look at it is by playing against the solution and just talking about the different situations that pop up as we play. Some general things to know about these spots is that usually, or rather not usually, it does happen that we have a set advantage in terms of villain is not going to have top two sets, because villain is going to be 3-betting from the big blind 9s plus. Therefore, they're not going to have 10s, jacks, so on. It's also generally the case that they're not going to have as much top two pair as we do, because they're going to be, for example, on this board, ace jack 8. They're going to be 3-betting a lot of ace-jack suited and some ace-jack off. So that's overall we have quite a big nut advantage, which is going to mean that we can use very big sizings. But in some cases, on some boards, we also have an advantage on the rest of our range. And so what happens sometimes is that we're going to want to split our C-betting between small sizings for our bad top pairs, middle pairs, and we're gonna be splitting a overbet sizing for good top pairs, maybe bottom set, maybe two pair, and hands like those. Top set and second set are usually gonna be bet for the small sizing if we use that small sizing on the board. On some boards, though, we're not going to be using a small sizing, and those boards will be two-tone, and they will generally have a lot of connectivity. For example, here I think we have a big amount of connectivity between the 8 and the jack. There's a lot of gut shots and open-enders, like 10-9 is an open-ender, 10-7 is a gut shot, jack 7 is a gut shot. Sorry, not jack 7, 10-7, 9-7, queen 10 is a gut shot, all that stuff. So what we will be doing on this board is mainly overbetting / potting the flop and not having a 1/3 bet. So here we're going to be betting around, let's talk before about the range, and then we'll talk about what we do with our specific hand. So on this board, we're going to be C-betting maybe like 50% of the time with our overall range. So we're going to be choosing pot size type sizing. And I don't have a pot size on my buttons right here. It's 3/4 and then 150. So it's probably going to mix somewhere in between the two. Yeah, this hand is obviously a pretty nice barrel. We have the double gutter, right? Queen 10. We have the flush draw blocker. And yeah, we are also blocking his open-enders, 10-9, which is not irrelevant. We're also blocking King Queen, which is not irrelevant as well. So this hand is going to be bet at a higher frequency than our overall frequency. What frequency would it be? I would say fairly high, maybe 90-80%. I'm going to go with like 85%. Of course, on this roll, we're going to be able to bet, and I think we're going to bet big on this roll. That is exactly right. We're betting 80% of the time, 81% of the time, and checking 19% of the time with that specific hand, because all of those positive features for bluffing that we talked about. Here, okay, so one thing about these types of hands is that on a given board, when you have the highest high card, so in this case the king is the highest high card, generally you're going to be looking to to realize your showdown value. Okay, so in this case with King 9, we don't really have an overcard to the board. We don't really have unblockers to folds. Well, I guess not having something like a 5, a 6, or a 7 is decent, while the 9 at least blocks 10-9, and the King blocks King Queen. But we don't really have a draw. We don't even have a backdoor flush draw. And this hand is actually, of the air hands, it's one of the highest showdown value ones. So we cannot bet for value with this hand. And if we bet, we are only making worse hands fold. So picture villain having King 2, King 3. Those are the hands that he is going to fold. He's not going to fold anything like... well, he could fold a pocket pair. Like, he could make like 5s fold, for example. But I think this is going to be pretty close to always checking. Pretty close to always checking. Now, we rolled on 95. So, do we actually check always, or do we have a 5% betting range? I think I'm going to pure check this one, and then we'll see what happens. But I'm just going to always check this one. Okay, so there is some frequency of betting, right? But yeah, I don't think it's a mistake to pure check it as well. As you can see, well, there's not quite any. All kings bet sometimes, I guess, because of the blocker features that are not so bad. So on a different board, maybe you would pure check a hand like this. But here, given that you block 10-9 and King Queen, maybe that's enough to bet it a little bit of the time. But yeah, the main idea to understand is that those hands actually have a fair amount of showdown value, and by betting you only mostly make better hands call, and worse hands, especially hands that you dominate, fold. You don't really want King 3 to fold when you have King 9. You want King 3 to continue by you checking, and then if a king comes, you can mini cooler them, so to speak. Ace Queen 9 is going to be fairly similar to the last board, where, as we can see here, there's no small betting. I figure that on this board there's also not going to be small betting. It's just it's two-tone. The queen and the 9 are fairly connected, and so is the ace with the queen. So I believe we are going to be only using big sizings. This, in terms of frequency, I think it's going to be pretty close to Ace Jack 8. The strategy overall is going to look fairly similar. Ace 8, is it going to bet higher than overall frequency? It might bet a little bit higher frequency than overall. I would say around overall. So for example, if overall is 50%, this hand is going to be around 50-50. The 8 is fairly decent to have because we are blocking a lot of the auto folds, like 8-7 of clubs, and so blocking those is nice because we want to get called, of course, when we have top pair. On a 4, I'm gonna just check though. Okay, so not quite 50-50, it's more like 30-70, right? So Ace 10 is betting 60-70%, and then Ace 8 is already tapering off a lot. So it's not quite like a gradient where it starts betting less and less in a uniform way. It's like it's betting less and less, and then from Ace 10 to Ace 8 it drops a lot. I assume because of something to do with not having an overcard to bottom pair. Maybe it's harder to cooler. Maybe it's harder to cooler certain hands when we don't have an overcard to the bottom pair or to the bottom card of the board. There's something interesting here that happens where somehow ace 4 and ace 5 are betting more often both than ace deuce and than ace 8. I'm not sure what that is about. Generally what you will find out, I mean, these things are not crucial. The important thing to understand is that you're going to be betting more often with the good top pairs and less often with the bad top pairs. Yeah, the sizings is just, as I said, pretty similar to the previous hand, to the previous board, ace jack 8. Now we have 8-6. Overall, this is a garbage hand. We're actually blocking a lot of the auto folds, which is not good. Good thing is that we are blocking some gut shots, and also we do have a kind of a meh backdoor straight draw. So not all is shit with this hand. But yeah, it's pretty bad. I think it's going to be definitely lower than overall. So overall, let's say it's 50%. This hand is going to be with the bad blockers and the positive feature of having a meh backdoor straight draw. I would say maybe like 10 to 20% of the time this is going to be bad. On an 87, I feel like we want to bet. Probably, if I have to choose between one of the two sizings, this one is going to go to the 4.4 because we're not drawing to anything so strong that will be his strong hands. Therefore, we don't want to narrow his own range too much. So yeah, I feel like we're going to choose 4.4. And let's 8-6. I actually underestimated how good this hand is, I guess. So it's betting around 45% of the time. I guess 20. Maybe it has something to do. Let's try to. So for example, 6-4. It's almost never betting, and 8-6 is betting a bit more. And then 5-3. Well, 5-3 has the 3 in it, and the 3 really unblocks all of the folds, which is pretty nice. Also, it has a backdoor straight draw as well. Okay, so yeah, it's basically the reason we're betting it more often than what I expected is just the backdoor straight draw. For example, you have 7-4. The frequency would look something like what I expected, like 20%, 10. But if you have 7-5, which suddenly has a backdoor straight draw, it jumps up to maybe like 50% with just the backdoor straight draw. So interesting to note that the backdoor straight draw actually matters quite a bit. Ace queen, this is going to be bet at a fairly high frequency. I would say almost always, if not precisely always. So we're definitely going to bet on our 35 roll. For sizing, we could mix both. I guess on the low roll, I can go the 4.4, and on a higher roll, I could go 8.8. But the main idea is that we want to bet this shit all the time. Yeah, it's actually not even bet for the 4.4 at that frequency. It's just almost always big. But yeah, the important thing to note there is that no checking at all. There's no checking at all. Jack 10, it's an open-ender. We're blocking a lot of gut shots and a lot of his own open-enders. We do have a diamond, which is somewhat good. For example, we're blocking bottom pair with a backdoor flush draw, which is nice. If we bet big, we can make some bottom pair without a backdoor flush draw. We can make them fold some of the time. This is not going to bet all the time though, because with open-enders, without a spade blocker, you want to mix some of those open-enders on the check back line, so you can, cover those boards when they do come. I would say this is going to be betting like 70% of the time, roughly, on a 10 with check. Yeah, okay, yeah, around 70% of the time. Without the spade. With the spade, maybe push it to like 80 to 90% of the time. Ace Jack 4. Similar idea to the previous boards, although, well, no, I was going to say the 4 is not connected, but the 4 is actually connected to the ace. So there's a lot of connectivity on this board, actually. And so there's not going to be much of a small sizing, I believe. Jack 9 is definitely not going to be one of those hands that you like betting, although we have a spade, which is generating some folds. I would say I'm debating between pure checking this hand and betting it some small amount of the time. It is probably bet at a like 10 to 20% frequency, I would say. Maybe even a little bit higher. Because of the spade. Without the spade, I believe it's going to be a pure check. We're going to bet it for the 4.4. Although I'm thinking maybe... Oh, okay, let me think. Because this board, I believe, when it's connected like this, the 4 to the ace, I'm not sure what the reasoning is, but I think we want to go bigger. We want to go 8.8. And if we go 8.8, suddenly this hand I don't think is going to be betting at all. For 4.4, I think we would. But for 8.8, I don't think we're going to be betting this hand at all. So I'm going to just check it. Yeah, pretty much never, unless we have a jack of spades. Not even the 9 of spades, which is weird. Like the jack of spades does bet a little bit. But yeah, the idea on this board, I mean, it's not important that you nail this. Like if you mixed like on the other boards, or if you went on all of these boards that we have played pot instead of mixing 75 and 150, that would be fine. Here it's a little bit of a splitting hairs type thing. But yeah, I just noticed that this was going to be one of those boards. Okay, 3s is going to be a fairly high frequency bet. I think it's going to be... I mean, we are unblocking all of the folds. So hands like 6-5 of hearts, 8-6 of clubs. Those hands are the auto folds on this board, and 3s unblocks all of those. Because villain's not going to have a lot of naked hands with the 3. We have the spade blocker, and we have the backdoor straight draw, and the backdoor flush draw, which is going to pump up our betting frequency by a lot. This might even be betting like 80 to 90% of the time. Maybe I'm overestimating it, but I know it's going to be a lot. And on the 65, we're definitely betting, and I think we're going to be betting big. Yeah, pretty much nailed it. About 80 to 90% of the time betting. We got our double gutter here on ace queen 8. Now this board is different because it's rainbow, okay? And on rainbow boards, generally we want to be splitting some small sizing, like 1/3. This board we're going to be splitting 1/3 and 150, I believe. The bottom is actually 160, not 150, but you know, same thing really. This hand, I believe, is going to be betting a fair amount higher than overall. Maybe overall here is going to be 60 or 70%. Keep in mind that we're splitting a small sizing. Therefore, a lot of the second pairs and bottom pairs are going to be betting much more often than on two-tone. Just because villain has a lower amount of equity with his entire range. And so we can target his hands with the smaller bets. Having said that, this is going to be betting like higher, I believe higher than the overall. We said overall is going to be like 65%. Then this is going to be betting like 80% of the time. On a 25, we still bet it. And we're going to go, maybe because of the roll, we actually go small, like 1.6. Jack 10, pretty much 80 to 90% of the time. On a low roll, you bet 1/3, and on a high roll, you overbet. 10-8. On this board's bottom pair does like betting depending on the board. So the lower the bottom card of the board is, the more you have an incentive for betting big with it, because you're kind of just turning it into a value bluff where you want to make higher pairs fold. Like for example, if this was ace queen 3, if you have king 3 and you bet big, you can make 5s fold, 6s fold. But here with 10-8, that pair is actually reduced a lot because he has no 9s, villain has no 9s, no 10s, no jacks, so we're not really making a lot of better hands fold when we bet. If we bet small though, we are getting called by a fair amount of worse hands, like gut shots and those type of things. So I think this hand is going to be betting not a very high frequency, maybe 20% of the time, I would say. So just about, like this roll will be just about on the threshold of betting or checking. And I believe we're always going to be wanting to bet small. Actually, now that I think of it, I'm going to pump it up to 30 or 40%, the betting frequency to, let's say 30%. So I'm going to bet small. And actually, very surprisingly, it is actually fairly high frequency. So I was thinking that maybe because the bottom card is so high, the betting frequency with it would be reduced compared to a board where, for example, a 3 was the lowest card. But that doesn't really hold, apparently. 10-8 has the 10 of, it's blocking 10-9, Jack 10, King 10. So it does have decent blockers for bluffing. For example, 9-8 is not really doing it. 9-8 is more along the lines of what I said before. So some of those combos are like 30 to 40% of the time betting. This combo of 9-8 is betting like 20% of the time. And so, you know, the thing I was basically not paying too much attention to that I should have is the 10 blocker being a fairly good blocker. So with that 10, you know, we have something called a future blocker. It's not only blocking hands now that could call, which is whatever, because we have a pair. We don't really mind gut shots calling us. But it's mostly that on certain runouts, we're going to be able to bluff very profitably, I believe, especially on the turn. And so yeah, I underestimated this frequency for sure. But it seems to be an outlier though. So for example, this 10-8 is much lower. 9-8 is definitely much lower. So it seems like it's somewhat of an outlier. But yeah, the important thing to understand with these low pairs is that you are going to be betting them, and you are going to be mixing. When you have this small bet and big bet structure, you're going to be mixing those sizings. The small bet is more for value, and the big bet is more to leverage fold equity, essentially. Here with 5s, it's pretty much the not low card for the not low hand for betting. I think we're maybe just pure check. Yeah, it's just pure checking. With the spade, it's different because with the spade we would have a fair amount of fold equity on certain runouts and some extra fold equity on even the flop. So this 1/8 here, pretty low frequency. Again, we're going to be betting maybe 40-50% of the time on this board overall. 8s is definitely going to be lower than that, and I pretty much think it's going to be a pure check as well. There's just, you're not really getting anything from betting. Indeed, it's a pure check. King 9, as we talked about before, King 9 is pretty much the quintessential check here. We do have some showdown value. We don't really gain anything by betting. I mean, we do have the 9 and the king, which are good blockers in of themselves, but on a 10 roll, maybe we would bet on like a 97 roll. But on a 10 roll, we're going to definitely be checking. Maybe we have like 5% of betting frequency, but maybe not even that. Right, so yeah, there's some like 5 to 10% betting frequency. But on a 10 roll, definitely not. And I think the idea is what we talked about before. We do have king queen blocker, king 10 blocker, 10-9 blocker, queen 9 blocker. So it's not the most horrible hand to bet with. Queen jack here. This is gonna be a lower frequency bet than overall. So if overall is gonna be around 50%, queen jack is gonna be maybe around 20, and always for the small sizing. I think on this roll we're gonna check. Yeah, pretty much 10 to 20% betting frequency, and pretty much always to the smaller sizings and not to the overbet. By the way, when I'm saying small sizings on this board, I'm not really referring to the 1/3, since on these two-tone boards we know that there's not going to be a 1/3. When I say small, I just refer to not an overbet, essentially. Jack 9 here. Jack is a decent blocker. We're blocking Jack 10. On the other hand, we're also blocking things like Jack 7, Jack 4 suited, Jack 3. So we're blocking a lot of air. So the Jack seems to be somewhat of a decent blocker, but not that great. It's just a bit of a nothing blocker. Having a 9 again is gonna be one of those things where we like betting with bottom pair. Now on a two-tone board, I'm not sure that we want to bet as often as on the other board with 10-8 that we saw before, because on that 10-8 board we did have it was a rainbow board, and we didn't have like flush draws and other stuff to essentially c-bet. But on this board we do have, for example, Jack 9 with a spade, right? And that hand is going to be betting much more often than Jack 9 without a spade, or even Jack 9 with 2 diamonds. So given that, I would mostly check this hand. Maybe we want to be betting it again around let me think, maybe 10% of the time. So I'm gonna check it this time. Yeah, I way underestimated that. So let's see. So the 9 of diamonds seems to be extremely important here, and it does make sense because 9x of diamonds would continue to a bet pretty much always, and so having the 9 of diamonds is going to reduce the amount of hands that calls. Even hands like king 9 of diamonds might call, or rather will call, but maybe king 9 of clubs will fold, and therefore by having a diamond we're getting some better hands to fold and some worse hands to potentially call, like king 10 for example. Let's see. So 9, what 9s? So for example, 9-8 is pretty much never betting without a backdoor flush draw, right? So 10. So what I said before about like 10 to 20% betting frequency with this particular hand, I was, I guess, thinking more about this type of deal that happens here. But seemingly there's something going on about, well, definitely about having a diamond, which is valued a lot, and even without a diamond it's betting quite a bit more. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it has to do with the blocker. The jack blocks jack 10 and king jack and all that shit, and that's gonna be a pretty good blocker. So yeah, keep in mind that I already failed on those two hands that were bottom pairs both, and in both of those I was missing the blocker to most of the straight draws, and I think that was the reason why it was betting so often. And I think that the reason here it's betting so often is that we have a straight draw blocker. King 3, you know, it's a nothing ball really. The 3 is good because we are unblocking all of the folds, which is a good feature. We're also making like king 8 fold when we bet, so we're saving us from a few coolers, denying a shit ton of equity from those hands. The king, we do block king, you know, what we were talking about before, king 10, king jack. Now, is that enough for betting? I think definitely on a 9 we're gonna check, but let's try to figure out what our frequency with this hand would be. I believe it would be around, not very high, maybe 20% of the time, maybe, if not a pure check. Let's see. Right, like, yeah, pretty much 20 to 30, more like 30% of the time. With the backdoor flush draw, it's more like 50-50, and with the actual flush draw, it's more like 80% betting. Important to note that something like king 9 would pretty much never bet, or very, very low frequency. And as you get down to king 4, king 3, king deuce, those bet a fair amount more frequently because we do have a better unblockers to villain's folding range, plus we do make certain hands fold that dominate us. Like for example, if we have king 3, we want to make king 7 fold, but if we have king 7, we don't want to make king 3 fold. That's the idea. Okay, so ace king here. You know, this board is fairly different because it's king high. On the king high boards, we're gonna be mixing a lot more small sizings. On this one though, being two-tone and being so connected, the 10 with the 7, there's a lot of gut shots and open-enders. King with 10, there's a lot of gut shots and also open-enders, yeah. And so this board I think is not gonna mix like 1/3 betting, but it is gonna mix like 3/4 or maybe half pot betting with overbets. This hand is definitely going to mostly overbet, and I would say the ace of spades is actually bad because we would like to, when we have a strong, very, very strong hand like top pair, top kicker, we don't really have we don't really want to have the extra equity with the ace of spades. We don't really like the extra equity because it's actually blocking villain's calls. We would rather not have. We would rather have ace of hearts and allow villain to have the ace of spades here. So here we're gonna be checking sometimes because of the ace of spades. Maybe we check 20% of the time and bet 80, and maybe without a spade we would bet pure. On a 59, I think we can go big. Actually, I think we might go over bet a fair amount of the time with this particular hand, and yeah, we go over bet 72% of the time. We check 7% of the time. So yeah, as we can see, the ace of spades, as I talked about before, the ace of spades is a bit bad, and without the ace of spades we pure bet. But even with the ace of spades, we are betting most of the time by far. So yeah, important thing to note there. 10-8 here. Same deal. We are gonna be betting like 60% of the time on this board, maybe 50 to 60. 10-8. 10-8 in of itself would be a lower than overall frequency, but having the flush draw is gonna pump it up, definitely. So I would say maybe around 50-50. I would go with 50-50 here, something like that. The 8 is blocking 9-8 for what it's worth, but it's not a super. Well, I guess that is important. We're having a strong straight blocker on a lot of turns on rivers. I guess that is somewhat important. But yeah, on a 61, I'm gonna bet it, and I'm gonna go 4.4. I think that's gonna be the sizing that we prefer here. Yeah, pretty much around 50-50, and just mixing both sizings. So if you're closer to 50, you bet smaller. If you're closer to 100, you bet bigger. We're not gonna look at this board because we're looking specifically at disconnected boards. So I'm gonna just get rid of this one. King 10 deuce, is that the same as before? No, it's different. Oh, okay. Yeah, this board, there is going to be a lot of small betting. Maybe it goes, the overall frequency, maybe it goes up to 70, maybe even like 80% betting frequency, because just the king high boards give us such a big advantage. Plus, we do have a big incentive towards both making some ace highs call with our, for example, if we have a 10 or a deuce, we can kind of get value from some ace highs, and we also have some incentive to deny equity with our king, unlike on an ace high board where if you have the ace, there's not much to deny equity from. There's not many hands that will fold to your bet that would beat you on a certain run out. But here there are actually, like if we make ace 7 fold, we're actually saving our ass when an ace comes on the turn or the river. So that just gives us a little bit more of an incentive to bet small. I feel like it's gonna be like mixing 30% and 160. This hand is just kind of shit, to be fair. Like, we do have a fairly decent backdoor straight draw, but that's all. The blockers are not great. We don't really want to block 9-7, 9-6, 9-5 of diamonds. We don't really like blocking 8-7 of clubs, 8-5 of clubs, all those shit hands. So the blockers are not great. We do have this backdoor straight draw, which is decent, I guess. So maybe with this hand we go up to like, I would say it's definitely lower than overall. So let's say overall is 70%. This hand would be maybe 40% betting, I would imagine. On a 78, we're definitely gonna bet. I think with this hand we mostly bet small because we don't really have a like strong draw to beat villain's calling range if we narrow it down too much. So I would mostly just bet small here. Yeah, so we pretty much nailed the overall strategy. 9-8 is actually betting a fair amount of the time. I would have imagined that with a spade we would be betting like this, yeah, like 70-80% of the time, and without a spade, that truck, man, so annoying. Please move. Okay, so truck moved. Yeah, we kind of nailed the overall strategy, but this 9-8 is actually betting quite more often than what I expected. I expected the one with a spade to bet like 70% of the time, and the one without a spade to bet like 40% of the time. But it seems for some strange reason that I can't really pinpoint, and I don't think, honestly, I think that no one can. For some reason, it seems like all of the 9-8 likes betting about the same amount. You do see a little bit more with the spade, but not much, which is weird, I guess. But yeah, important to note, or like the important takeaway that you can take from this, is that you shouldn't be just auto checking with the nothing ball hands. You do need to bet them at some frequency. even if you don't nail it, even if you say, okay, I'm gonna bet this 40% of the time, at least you are betting it a fair amount of the time, which is going to strengthen your check back range. If you start checking all this shit all the time, your check back range is gonna be weak as shit. You know, this hand is gonna be betting a fair amount of the time, I believe. I would say higher than the let's say overall 70%. This is gonna be betting higher than that, so maybe 85% of the time, something like that. On a random 32, I would still bet it. Sometimes with the combo draws, you see that they check a lot, but I feel like we have an overcard, we have open-ender blockers, we have showdown value, we can get called by worse. Yeah, I believe it's a fairly decent hand to bet. I'm gonna go small here. And yeah, pretty much actually nailed it. Did I say 85% of the time bet? Because it's actually exactly 85% of the time. So yeah, basically that's the idea. It's a little bit higher than the overall. I keep saying that the overall is 70. It's actually 63, so I'm kind of like missing the mark a little bit there, but not super important. Jack 10-5 here, you know, bit of a different board. It's Jack high. It's two-tone. It's fairly connected. I'm gonna say we don't have small bets here. We're gonna have like maybe half pot or 3/4 and over bets, and we're not gonna have as many over bets because here we do really want to bet some hands for protection, and we do want to. It's funny that we use protection in this in two different ways in poker. That's mean two completely different things. So with some hands we want to bet for protection, which means making over cards to your pair fold essentially. And with stronger hands we want to protect those hands. So we are not going to be betting so big so often with the strong hands because we want to put them in the small betting range more often, just because we have so many weaker, you know, marginal value hands in that range. 7 is kind of a shit card to have. We do block 7-8, 7-9, which is, I guess, decent, especially with the backdoor's flush draw blocker. The king is an overcard, which is good. So this hand, I think the 7 is not great, but it's still gonna bet maybe like, let's say, so if overall here is gonna be what could be 60, for example, maybe this is, I would say this is more than 60. I would say this is maybe 70. But I think on a 28 I'm gonna check. So actually I overestimated it by a little bit. It's not 70, it's more like 53. You know, close enough. Important to note that as you get lower and lower in as your hand becomes lower and lower, you start, you know, betting more often because you have better unblockers, the villain's folding range, and yeah, you also make dominating hands fold, which is really cool. 10-9, gonna be much lower of a frequency than the previous hand, I believe. If overall is 60%, I think this is going to be maybe 20%. Maybe on the 94 we can bet it. Yeah, 33% of the time we bet it. So not much. We do bet it to the small sizing unless we have the flush draw. And yeah, we just it is important to differentiate between the times where you bet more with a higher kicker and the times where you bet more with a lower kicker. So here, because we are actually betting for value, like we actually get called by worse, the stronger our kicker, the better, right? But when we bet to make villain fold, then the lower the kicker is usually better because we can make more hands fall with a lower kicker. A lower kicker is going to be a better unblocker of the air, and it is also going to make villain fold dominating hands, which is great. Jack 9. So this is the same board as before. This is going to be a 160 or check type board. Jack 9 is not going to bet ever, I believe. Just pure check. It's actually betting sometimes. Just sometimes. But, I mean, yeah, not really worth to do bet it, I believe. I think this board is better to just do 160 and check rather than split that small sizing. And once you get rid of the small sizing, this hand just never bets. Sixes, not great blockers. We do block hands like 6-7, 6-8, 6-9. So unblockers are not great. The spade is fairly good, so I don't think we're going to be checking it all the time. But given that, maybe let's say this is overall a 50% bet board, and holy shit, that was noisy. Let's say this is 50% bet board, and this hand goes like maybe 20%, 10, 20%. I'm thinking maybe even pure checks, but I'm gonna say 10% betting, and on this roll I'm just gonna check. Yeah, it's just not even 10%. So it does bet sometimes as opposed to without a spade. So without a spade it's just pure check. With a spade is like 5% betting. So it's really about the blockers and unblockers. And because as you can see, and also the falling out dominating hands. So for example, with sixes, we can't make, or rather we don't want to make fives fall when we have sixes. When we have deuces, we really do want fives to fold. So same idea, unblockers and dominating versus dominated. Plus the fives actually and threes and deuces do have a backdoor straight draw, which definitely affects the frequency there. This board we don't care about. This board we don't care about. It's gonna repeat the same board twice every time. So that's how I set it up. Just went back to the same as before. We have a backdoor straight draw. We have two backdoor straight draws with the jack. We have 10-9 straight, and we have 5-6 straight. So this is going to definitely be betting higher frequency, especially with a flush draw. I believe higher than overall. The 8 and the 7 are pretty terrible blockers. Like we're just blocking all of villain's folding range. Now, them being spades blocks less, because now we're only blocking like 8-7 with the 8s of spades, for example. We're blocking that. But we're not blocking like 8-7 of clubs, which would snap fold. So the blockers are, because the spade, them being spades, kind of makes the rank of the cards not be so bad to bet with. I think this is gonna be maybe like, I'm thinking 70% bet. I'm thinking, yeah, something like 70%. On a 56, we're definitely gonna bet. I'm thinking we're gonna bet big here. Okay, so 45% rather than 60 or 70, whatever I said. And the idea, I believe, the reason it's betting infrequently is because of the blocker stuff. So we would rather have, 5-3, of course, is a gut shot. So there's not like pure shit on this board much. Like most of the random garbage does have some type of backdoor straight draw type thing. But yeah, it's just important to keep in mind that it's not like, oh, I have a flush draw, bet. You need to look at it, gauge all of the pros and cons of betting, and of course in game you're not going to do it this thoroughly, but you just train it, and then you kind of just autopilot it a little bit in game. 10-6. 10 I believe is going to be a very strong blocker of hands like Queen 10, King 10. Yeah, and the 6 is a pretty bad one. So 6 is kind of terrible. 10 is pretty nice to have, and the flush draw is fairly good. So if this is a 50% betting board, this hand might be, I believe, higher for sure, and it might be from 50, it might go to 70. Let's say 70, maybe 60 to 70. On a 28, we're gonna check. It's actually lower. It's 40. It's about 50-50. And I think the main reason, well, okay, so one of the reasons is that I'm overestimating the betting frequency on this board. It's actually 40% rather than 50, and so that was kind of making me overestimate all of the frequencies a little bit. But also having the 6 is not great. You would rather have, a 5, for example. It's much better than a 6 to have. Kind of interesting this pattern where the nothing balls are betting more often than the flush draw. I would honestly not look too much into that. I don't really know why that is. I don't really care too much, but it's interesting. I think we would have to dive deep into that at some point, because it's an interesting thing that happens all of the time on a bunch of spots. It mostly is the other way, of course. It mostly is that extra equity makes you bet more often, but sometimes this shit happens. Not sure why. Don't think it's important. No one really does it, so yeah. Yeah, like almost pure checking 10-9 suited. No one really does this at all. And I wonder what that means. Gonna ignore this board a bit. Gonna ignore this board as well. Okay, this is a pretty nice split board. We're going to be splitting between 30% and overbet. Going to be like around 70% overall betting frequency because of the small bet split. We do have a fairly nice backdoor. We have 2 backdoor straight draws, and we have a backdoor, the backdoor flush draw, which is going to pump up the frequency of this hand, I believe, higher than... We don't block like open-enders or anything good, and we do block some of the folds, which is not great. So I think this will be a little higher than overall. Maybe from 70, we could go to 80. So maybe on a random 25, we can still bet small. And yeah, pretty much 80 to 90%. On a low roll, we bet small. On a high roll, we bet big. 5-4, we have a really nice bet, I believe. Here we do have the 2 fairly good backdoor straight draws, fairly good ones as well. The backdoor flush draw, and the blockers are, I think, nice. It's good to have a 5 and a 4, just because villain's gonna have so much, like 6, 8, 9 hands, that 9x hands that will fold. Maybe the 9 and the 8 are decent because we block. We would block gut shots. but I think this is pretty nice for what it's worth. Could this be a pure bet? I'm not sure, really. I believe it could be a pure bet, but I'm still gonna give it like, let me think. So if this board is 70, let's push up let's push this up to 90% betting, 95% betting. So even on a 19, I'm gonna still bet. I'm gonna bet small though, and see what happens. Yeah, I actually way overestimated the frequency on this one. It's more like 60%. 5-3 is a little bit more frequent because the 3 unblocks more folds. But yeah, let me see, like for example, for 10-4. Okay, so yeah. So 10-4, it likes it a lot more because it's blocking the gut shots. So it seems like one thing that I'm constantly underestimating on this review is that blocking the gut shots is actually a really nice feature. So having an 8, having a 9, having a 10 especially, because we block the jack to the 7 gut shots, and we also block the ace to the jack gut shots, is a really nice feature while having a 5-4. I mean, it's a good hand to bet, of course, but not as good as the other shit. Deuces, I think without a spade, we're never gonna bet it. Maybe not never. Maybe actually like 30% of the time could be. And if we bet it, I think it's gonna be too overbet because we want to get called here by flush draws, or rather, we don't give a shit if we get called by flush draws, but we really want to make a lot of pairs fold when we have deuces. We want to make a lot of dominating hands fold and a lot of drawy hands call. Yeah, it's betting only at 4% time. I figured it would be a little higher than that, but no. It's just about never. Maybe like 5% of the time 4. And let's do this last board right here. Or this last hand. 9-8, we have a open-ender. We have another backdoor straight draw. Well, it's not a backdoor straight, it's just part of the open-ender. I was thinking maybe 6-7 would be a backdoor straight, but no. 6-7 would just be jack to the 7 straight, which is a open-ender straight draw. So we have an open-ender. We have a flush draw blocker. I think this is going to be bet at a higher frequency than equilibrium. Let's say equilibrium here bets 60%. This hand would have to be betting like 90% of the time. With this low overall, we're going to bet small though. Yeah, 87% of the time. 9-8, sorry. With a spade, betting fairly often. So yeah, let's wrap up there for now. We looked at flop c-bets on double Broadway, disconnected boards, bottom versus big blind. Next time we will look at some other boards, probably, or maybe we could continue with the double Broadway ones with defense. But yeah, that's it. See you.